Today I want to talk to you about conquering your past, moving beyond the past, because sometimes the past is not staying in the past. Last month, our Conquer videos, we talked about conquering shame and conquering trauma, and that may have brought up for you some memories of past hurts that you know you need to let go of, but you don't know how. Generally, it's not a good idea to continually rehash and rehearse past hurts or past failures and mistakes, though sometimes doing so with a Christian counselor or coach may help you to start to gain a better understanding of the links between what happened to you in the past and your current circumstances and choices and what you need to learn from them in order to grow and change. But just solely focusing your energy on remembering and examining your past will not necessarily help you learn to live more positively or productively in the present. Good coaching may encompass both elements, but there should always be an emphasis on how to live better now. And so understanding the past so that you can do something different now is our goal. Even if you've never been traumatized in your childhood, we all have a past, which establishes lifestyle patterns, good and bad, godly and ungodly. And these lifestyle patterns are the things that we must begin to pay attention to so that we can learn to respond differently now. You know, as the sun sets each day, it slips from the present and now it becomes past, yesterday. And for many of us, our suffering is more fresh and recent. It's not from childhood events, but from last week or last year or yesterday. And you still feel stuck and you find hard to let go of it and move beyond it. Sometimes your anguish isn't because of what someone has done to you even, but because of what you've done to yourself or to someone you love. For example, aborting a baby or making a poor decision to marry someone and now having to live with those consequences. Every past mistake, sinful action, wrong word, poor choice, you rehearse again and again as a means of reminding yourself what a failure you really are, which is that toxic shame we talked about last month. So hear me. Whether the pain that you're stuck in is from your recent past or from your childhood, from your own mistakes or for the sins of other people, learning and practicing 5 steps that I'm going to teach you in this month and next month Conquer videos will help you break free. Now I'm going to cover the first 3 steps in this week's video and then step 4 and 5 in the next 2 videos so I can spend a little more time explaining how to walk through them. But step 1 is you have to acknowledge the truth of what happened. You can't move beyond the past. You can't move beyond something if you don't honestly face it. Whether it's your fear, your shame, your trauma, your failures, your sins. Now if you've listened to me much, you've heard me say this again and again. We can't change something we won't see. We won't acknowledge or accept as true. And whether it's your own past failures and mistakes or the sins of someone else, you can't fix or forgive something that didn't happen, is no big deal, not really a problem, or someone else's fault. These defenses are called denial, minimization, rationalization, and blame shifting, and they hinder you from facing the situation and feeling your emotions and getting better. This is our very first step in building core strength. That C step, I am committed to the truth, both internally and externally. Remember, no more pretending. Now, sometimes we don't know all the facts of what happened to us in our past. We have our perception of what happened and our feelings about it, but we're fuzzy on all the details, especially when these offenses occurred during our childhood. But even during a traumatic event that's been more recent, we can't always remember every detail. So acknowledging the truth of what happened to you doesn't mean that you accurately recall every single detail, but it means that you name it for what it is. For example, if you were violated or manipulated as a child for sexual favors, it wasn't love, it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't God's will, it wasn't your fault, and it wasn't because you were so cute and irresistible. It was sin. For example, I'll work with a woman I'll call Candace, and she was very depressed, but she wasn't sure why. And so in the process of getting to know her, I asked about her childhood. Her story was her dad was an alcoholic and her mom worked really hard to support the family. And in spite of these hardships, Candace excelled at school, and she had many friends and outside activities. She was great in soccer and track, and during the course of our coaching session, she casually mentioned that when she was 13 years old, she had a 2-year sexual relationship with her high school teacher. But now that she was a Christian, she felt guilty because he had been married. Candace was not, however, able to see a connection with what happened back then and her current difficulties with men or depression. Candace demonstrated a pattern of minimizing her problems and not facing the truth about events in her life. In this case, her teacher was a 35-year-old married man who should not have been flattering and preying on vulnerable, pretty 13-year-old students. And as Candace began to recognize the true nature of their relationship, it was not a love affair, she not only felt guilty, she started to feel enraged. And feeling her anger and her guilt was a necessary and important part of her healing and breaking free. But she could only do that when she acknowledged this relationship for what it really was. Sometimes we don't want to face the truth about what others have done to us or what we've done because we don't want to feel the strong emotions that accompany admitting that reality. So many women tell me that they're afraid to face their destruction in their marriage because they don't know what to do with the emotions that come up when you recognize that you are being abused. Just this morning, I spoke to someone who found out that her husband slept with her close friend, but she refused to believe it for years or even acknowledge it until recently. Why? Because she's afraid she won't be able to handle the feelings that come up, or she won't know what to do, and so it's just easier to shut down and turn off. But this decision only makes matters worse for you and harder in the long run. Now, when it's your own fault and failures that keep you bound to the past, you also must look truthfully at yourself. And often I find that a woman who rehearses and bemoans her past mistakes, her sins and her failures, has difficulty accepting the truth, that she's an imperfect, sinful human being. And her sorrow or mourning is not because she's hurt another person or even offended God, but because she's disappointed in herself. She cannot get over that she didn't handle something as perfectly as she would have liked, and consequently, she starts to hate herself. Again, this is that toxic shame operating. Instead of learning from her failures or confessing her sin and turning toward God for help to grow, she's always looking backwards, beating herself up. "Oh, I should have done that," because she failed to live up to her own ideal standards. Perhaps, as my friend and author Gary Thomas writes, she's made an idol, or you've made an idol, out of your own piety. French mystic Francois Fenelon, one of my favorite old guy mentors, encourages those of us who have this tendency with these wise words. He says, "Go forward with confidence, without letting yourself be touched by the grief of a sensitive pride, which cannot bear to see herself imperfect." So face the truth of what's going on. And the second step is allow yourself to feel your feelings. If you're starting to feel emotions, especially anger, that's already a huge step. However, as we've already learned in past Conquer videos, our feelings can often get quite powerful. And if we're in the habit of just letting them run roughshod over our lives, they can be quite scary. Perhaps we've been afraid to feel what we do because of how we might react when we become emotionally charged. Rather than struggle through that turmoil and learn how to deal with our emotions, it's just easier to become numb. Feeling something strongly, however, does not mean you have to act out those feelings. When we feel strong emotions, we need to be careful and wise. Feeling strong feelings does not entitle us to be reactionary or retaliatory in our behavior. For example, when Candace began to feel rage at the reality of how much her teacher had taken advantage of her naivety and youthful foolishness, what she wanted to do was march right over to his house and scream at him and rip his heart out. And then she wanted to report him to the school district and tell his wife and kids what he did. Some of these actions might later be necessary and right, but for the moment, it was just important that Candace feel her strong emotions and process them without taking specific action that she might later regret, especially while she felt so furious. Rage is much like toxic waste. We need to contain it and figure out how to dissipate it without letting it spill out all around us, hurting others or ourselves in the process. How? Get your journal out. Journal writing is an excellent way to dump your toxic feelings. No one sees them but you and God, and you're free to write down everything and anything you feel. Hopefully you've already been practicing writing out your feelings, but if not, start now, because you have to allow yourself to express in a safe way what you feel. You must give yourself a voice, even if no one else has. And the process of writing helps you to release those negative emotions from your body and your mind so that you can take the next step. Another good way to release your feelings is to vent them with a trusted friend, counselor, or coach. You want someone who will allow you to have a voice and who will accept that you are feeling strong negative emotions without scolding you or trying to fix you or attempting to get you to stop feeling them. One word of caution I offer is this. Once sometimes those emotions get started, sometimes you get stuck in this step. You don't move on to the next step. You don't move on beyond feeling your feelings, venting them over and over again, rehearsing every wrong ever done. And by doing so, you continue to be bound to your past, drowning in your own cesspool of hurt, self-pity, bitterness, rage, and helplessness. So allow your feelings, your emotions, accept them, and after feeling them and verbalizing your negative emotions, let them go. How? Thank them for what they've told you, how they've instructed you on what's wrong. And now you use your emotional energy to take the next step, and the next step, and the next step to let go of your past. To get better and let go of the past, you must move yourself forward even when it's hard. And if you have found yourself unable to do this or afraid of your strong emotions and feel unsafe, please call a Christian counselor, pastor, coach, or other professional to help you do it safely. Sometimes you do need that outside help to do this work, but don't let it stop you. Do the work, because that's letting go of the past. The third thing is release the things that you're not responsible for. In the tangled web of sin, there are things that we have done and things that have been done to us. And often we neglect to take responsibility for the things we're responsible for, or conversely, we take responsibility for the things that are not our fault. Let me give you an example. Andrea's father molested her when she was 9. In the crackle of lightning and the crashing boom of thunder, she got scared as a little girl, frightened, and she jumped into her parents' bed for comfort and protection, forgetting that her mom was in the hospital recuperating from surgery. So, in a sleepy haze, she snuggled up next to her dad to feel safe. And the next thing she remembers is his drunken breath all over her. Years later now, even though parts of her know better, Andrea still blamed herself. She told herself that if only she hadn't crawled into her daddy's bed that night, this wouldn't have happened. Now, as we worked together, Andrea took the first step and emotionally faced the truth of what happened to her. The truth was that she wanted her dad to comfort and protect her. She didn't want him to be sexual with her, and he misused the situation and exploited it for his own selfish purposes. When Andrea acknowledged emotionally how her father sinfully used her, she felt flooded with hurt, confusion, anger, and deep, deep sadness. As she expressed and worked through these strong emotions, she finally let go of the responsibility that she assumed for what happened that stormy night. It was not her fault that her father molested her. It was her dad's responsibility to act like a good father, even in tempting situations. She was just a frightened little girl and acted appropriately for her age. But Andrea's work in her quest to become free from the bondage of her past wasn't quite over yet. You see, Andrea is no longer a little girl. She's an adult, and she needs to learn to live as a mature one. Andrea now must take responsibility for how she used the excuse of what happened to her to continue to act helpless, refuse to try new things, avoid owning the problems that she created by her passivity in relationships, like being continually sexually exploited in dating relationships, or being attracted to men who used and abused her. Without doing this important work, Andrea will still stay stuck, blaming her past for her current problems in living. So if you want to let go of your past, start by facing the truth of what happened, feeling the emotions that it brings up without panic, without beating yourself up for feeling them, and without acting out. Just feel them. Write them down. Ask what purpose they serve. What do they need to tell you? It's sort of like the pain in your foot when you step on a nail. You pay attention. It's telling you something. And once you listen and examine your foot and pay attention to that feeling, you see there's something wrong, you take care of it, you pull it out, and the pain starts to go away. It served its purpose. Now you can let it go. Lastly, evaluate what you have blamed yourself for that perhaps you were not responsible for. You are not responsible for other people's actions. Even if you were a naughty kid at times, your parents were responsible for disciplining you in love. Even if you've not been a perfect wife, your husband is responsible for how he responds to his own disappointments. Journal, write things down, and think through these 3 steps. Because in our next video, I'll share the final step, or not the final step, but the 4th step, and then the next video next month will be the final step, to let go of the past. So the past can be in the past. Until next time, God bless.